Right now, if you dropped your face into a sink full of cold water, your heart rate would slow down without you telling it to. It's automatic. It's left over from something older than you. Most people go their whole lives without ever noticing it, but there's a group of people scattered across the islands of Southeast Asia whose bodies didn't just inherit that old reflex. They built something new on top of it. An organ inside their chest grew larger, generation after generation, until it started working less like a human spleen and more like a scuba tank. And the strangest part isn't the biology. It's how fast it happened, and what it's costing them now that the ocean they adapted for is starting to disappear. They're called the bajau, though most people have never heard the name. For over 1,000 years, they've lived across the waters between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, spending most of their lives on wooden houseboats and only stepping onto land when they have to. A chronicler traveling with Ferdinand Magellan's crew wrote about them in 1521, describing people who seem to live entirely on the sea. That description still holds up today. Many bajau children learn to swim before they learn to walk, and some grow up thinking of a boat deck the way most kids think of a backyard. Divers can spend as much as 60% of an 8-hour workday underwater, spearing fish and octopus, gathering sea cucumbers, sometimes descending past 70 meters, with nothing but a set of weights and a pair of wooden goggles. No tanks, no fins most of the time, just breath. That kind of endurance shouldn't be possible for an ordinary human body, and for years, nobody could fully explain how the bajau managed it. People had theories. Maybe it was just training, the same way a marathon runner's heart gets more efficient over decades. Maybe it was something they learned to control mentally, a kind of practiced calm. Then in 2018, a doctoral student named Melissa Alardo, working out of the University of Copenhagen, decided to actually find out instead of guessing. She didn't start with a lab. She started by moving to a coastal village called Jaya Bhakti in Indonesia, living alongside the bajau for months, carrying a portable ultrasound machine from house to house. She wanted to meet the community first, not just show up with equipment and disappear again. What she found, published that year in the journal Cell, changed how scientists think about human evolution on a short timescale. The bajau's spleens were, on average, 50% larger than those of their land-dwelling neighbors, a nearby group called the Saluan. And here's the detail that mattered most. It wasn't just the divers who had enlarged spleens. Bajau who had never dived a day in their life showed the same enlargement. That ruled out the obvious explanation, that diving simply trains the body over a lifetime. If it were only training, non-divers wouldn't have inherited the trait too. So Alardo and her colleagues, including evolutionary geneticist Rasmus Nielsen at UC Berkeley, sequenced the bajau's DNA. They found around 25 genetic sites that stood out compared to the Saluan and a separate Han-Chinese comparison group. One of them sat on a gene called PDE10A, a gene tied to thyroid hormone regulation. In mice, that same hormone pathway controls spleen size directly. Less of it, and the spleen shrinks. Restore it, and the spleen grows back. The bajau appear to carry a version of this gene that keeps that hormone pathway turned up, and their spleens grew to match. Quietly, over generations, nobody was watching closely enough to notice. Alardo also checked the pattern against a second comparison population, the Han Chinese, to make sure it wasn't just noise in the data. It held up both times. Age, sex, and height were all ruled out as explanations too. Whatever was driving the spleen size traced back to the genome itself. Not lifestyle, not body type, not anything a person could simply train their way into. Here's what that actually means for a diving body. The spleen acts as a reservoir for oxygenated red blood cells. When a mammal dives, whether it's a human, a seal, or a whale, something called the diving reflex kicks in automatically. It's the same reflex behind that cold water trick from the start of this video. The heart rate drops. Blood vessels in the arms and legs tighten, redirecting blood toward the heart, lungs, and brain. And the spleen contracts, squeezing its stored blood cells into circulation for extra oxygen. Researchers studying Japanese and Korean pearl divers back in 1990 documented this same contraction response. But that's a temporary squeeze. The same size spleen working a little harder for a few minutes. The bajau have something structurally different. A permanently larger spleen means a permanently larger reserve to squeeze from, dive after dive, without needing to be trained into it. Scientists had already noticed this pattern in animals built for life underwater. Weddell seals, some of the deepest diving mammals on the planet, carry spleens that are enormous relative to their body size, for exactly the same reason. According to Nielsen, the size difference could give a diving bajau roughly 10% more oxygenated red blood cells available during a dive compared to someone without the trait. One bajau diver told Alardo he'd once stayed under for 13 straight minutes. Nobody times it competitively. Nobody needs to. It's just what the body does now. This is the first time researchers have documented a genetic adaptation to diving in a human population. Not a skill, not training. An actual inherited physical change, built by natural selection, working on a lifestyle that's been repeated for something like 1,000 years. In evolutionary terms, that's barely any time at all. It usually takes far longer for a trait like this to show up in a population's genes, which is part of why nobody on the research team expected to find anything when the study started. And that's where this stops being just a cool fact about spleens, because the ocean that shaped the bajau into something closer to a diving mammal than the rest of us is the same ocean that's now pulling away from them. Warming water is bleaching the coral reefs they've hunted for generations. Overfishing has thinned out the same fish stocks their entire way of life depends on. And on top of that, most bajau laut, the most sea-dependent branch of the community, don't hold citizenship anywhere. In the Malaysian state of Sabah alone, an estimated 28,000 bajau laut live along the coast, and roughly 78% of them are undocumented. No official nationality means no guaranteed access to schools, no formal healthcare, and in some cases, fear of arrest even while their own children are sitting in a classroom, born on a houseboat instead of in a hospital that would have handed them a birth certificate. So picture that for a second. A lineage spent 1,000 years being rebuilt, gene by gene, to belong to the sea more completely than any other people on Earth. And now the sea is being taken from them twice. Once by a warming planet that doesn't ask permission, and once by nations that don't recognize they exist. You've probably never had to hold your breath for something that mattered. Maybe the deep end of a pool as a kid, maybe a moment underwater in a bathtub, and even then it was over in 20 or 30 seconds. Most of us live so far from the ocean's actual demands that our bodies never get the chance to respond to them the way the bajaus did. We built houses, thermostats, and grocery stores between ourselves and the pressures that used to shape what a human body becomes. But the bajau proved something uncomfortable. Evolution didn't stop when we got comfortable. It just stopped having anything left to push against. Give a population a real, sustained, generational demand, and the human body will still answer it, spleen and all. It happened in roughly 1,000 years, which sounds like a long time until you remember our species has been around for a few 100,000. The question worth sitting with isn't whether we've lost the ability to adapt. It's what happens to an adaptation that took 1,000 years to build, once the reason for it gets erased in a single lifetime. What do you do with a body that finished becoming exactly what its environment demanded, right as that environment stops existing? There's no gym for this. No supplement, no breathing app, no cold plunge routine sold on your phone is going to hand you a spleen like theirs. That kind of change only comes from generations of a specific, unrelenting demand repeated so consistently that the body has no choice but to answer it. Most of us will never live inside a demand like that. The bajau did for 1,000 years straight, and the proof is sitting inside their chests right now. Somewhere off the coast of Sabah, a child is being born tonight with a spleen already built to hold more of the ocean than yours ever will. She may never get to use it the way her grandparents did. Not because her body forgot how to dive, but because the water she was built for is running out of fish, running out of reef, and running out of room for people the world still refuses to call citizens of anywhere. Her body finished the story evolution started 1,000 years ago. It's the rest of the world that hasn't decided how it ends.